Hi, I'm Elowen, and the day I thought I was going to sign papers for the apartment my grandfather promised me was the day I realized my own brother had already decided I shouldn't exist anymore. Halfway to the notary, his driver pulled over, pale and shaking, and whispered, "Hide in the trunk, don't make a sound." So I did, and from inside that darkness, I heard my brother calmly planning how to declare our 82-year-old grandfather mentally unfit, take everything through court, and erase me like I was a typo in our family history. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I listened, while my life was being rewritten without me. And what I discovered next made me question whether this was ever about an apartment or a plan that had started long before I even knew I was being pushed out. Before we begin, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? Leave a comment below, because if you've ever been erased by someone who was supposed to protect you, you might already understand how this story begins. 2 weeks ago, I stood on the front porch of my grandfather's house, keys in hand, heart oddly steady. The crisp autumn air smelled like cedar and cold pavement. That house, with its moss-covered roof and the creaking porch swing, held decades of memory, mine and his. He had called me Little Elowen ever since I was 5. It didn't matter that I was now in my 30s with a degree and a job that paid the bills. To him, I was still the one who followed him into the garden with a notepad, asking questions no one else had time for. That morning, he pressed a wooden keyring into my palm. L.E., it said, carved in his shaky hand. "You'll need this when you sign the papers." His voice was warm, but tired. "It's yours, Ellie. You've earned it, not just by blood, but by heart." I didn't cry. I just held it, knowing I wouldn't let go. The apartment, a modest second-floor unit in a quiet part of Redmond, was something he'd bought years ago as a fallback, a place for just in case. And now he was giving it to me. Not lending, not promising, gifting, legally. It should have been simple. But when I texted my older brother to let him know I was heading to the lawyer's office, all I got back was, "Tied up with a vendor meeting, sending Caleb to drive you, be ready at 2. That was it. No, congrats. No, say hi to Grandpa. Just a brush-off wrapped in professional courtesy. I should have felt it then, the shift, the subtle tilt of something sliding beneath me. At exactly 2 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Caleb stepped out, same neat uniform, same polite nod. He'd driven for our family for years, rarely spoke, always punctual. As I slid into the back seat, he gave me a quick glance through the rearview mirror. "Afternoon, Ms. Elowen." "Hi, Caleb. Thanks for the ride." He didn't smile, didn't offer small talk. The drive started normal enough. Standard Seattle traffic crawling along 520, patches of gray sky pressing down through the sunroof. Rain misted, dotting the windows like Morse code. I pulled out my phone to reread the message from my grandfather's attorney. Then Caleb's phone rang. A quick buzz. He clicked to answer through the speaker, but the voice that came through was muffled, male, curt. Caleb didn't speak back. He just listened. I watched his knuckles go white on the steering wheel. "Everything okay?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Yeah, just traffic." But we weren't moving. He had pulled into a side road, one that wasn't part of the route I knew. He reached up, turned off the GPS. That's when my stomach dropped. "Caleb?" I asked, more firmly. He glanced back at me, then looked around like someone was watching. The road was empty, lined with trees beginning to turn gold and crimson. "Listen," he said, voice low. "You need to trust me." My breath caught. He pulled the SUV into a clearing and parked. Then he opened his door, stepped out, and walked around to mine. I didn't know what to do. Run? Call someone? My phone was still in my bag, zipped up. He opened the back hatch and motioned toward it. "Get in the trunk, right now. Don't say a word." "What?" "Please, just do it. Don't talk, don't move. And whatever you hear, you stay silent." My instincts screamed to protest, but something about the way his eyes darted, not fear, but urgency, made me move. I climbed into the back, tucking my body into the curve of the trunk, like I had as a child during road trips, when I pretended to be invisible. Caleb shut it gently, leaving it unlatched just enough for a sliver of light and air. And then, footsteps, a voice, familiar, my brother. "Did she get in?" he asked. Caleb replied, calm. "Yeah, just waiting here like you said." I pressed my palm over my mouth. "Good," my brother said. "We don't need her complicating things. The court hearing's next week. Once we get the doctor's statement about Grandpa's condition, I'll file the motion. He won't see it coming." "Are you sure the lawyer will go along with it?" "He works for the firm Dad used. Loyalty is baked in. Besides, who's gonna listen to Elowen? She's never been involved in anything, just background noise." My chest burned, not from lack of air, but from every word slicing through old trust. "I'll take over the property. Say it's for management. Once Grandpa's declared unfit, I control the assets. And she?" He chuckled. "She can have a framed photo of the place." They both laughed. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just curled tighter, feeling the keyring press into my ribs. And in that moment, curled inside the darkness of the trunk, I understood that the drive I thought was leading to my future was actually leading to my disappearance. I held my breath as their voices grew clearer, each word stripping away the version of my brother I thought I knew. The trunk smelled faintly of rubber and dust. Every small movement felt too loud, so I stayed perfectly still, listening. "Doctor's letter is already drafted," my brother said, his tone steady, almost bored. "We just need Percival to miss one more appointment. That's enough to show cognitive decline. Judges don't argue with paperwork." Another voice answered, lower, unfamiliar. "And Elowen?" A pause, then a quiet laugh. "She's emotional, always has been. We position her as unstable, maybe overly attached. Courts hate drama. They prefer control." My fingers dug into the lining beneath me. Emotional, unstable. Words chosen carefully, like pieces on a chessboard. "She won't fight," he added. "She never does." That stung more than anything. Not the betrayal, the certainty behind it. They talked logistics next. Filing deadlines, conservatorship petitions, a timeline that moved faster than anything I'd imagined. The apartment wasn't the prize, it was leverage. If Grandpa was declared unfit, everything shifted to whoever controlled his care. Control meant ownership. And ownership meant erasing me without ever saying my name out loud. The car rocked slightly as someone leaned against it. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to memorize each detail. Tone, words, silence between sentences. I had nothing else to hold on to except what I heard. Somewhere in the middle of their conversation, a memory pushed forward, uninvited but sharp. 3 months ago, my brother standing in Grandpa's kitchen, shaking his head. "He keeps repeating himself, Elle. You need to face reality." I'd defended Grandpa then. He forgot small things, yes, but he still quoted poetry by heart, still argued about baseball statistics with impossible accuracy. Then came the new doctor, the sudden cancellation of family meetings because I was too sensitive. The day I was told financial updates would only stress me out. At the time, I thought it was protection. Now it felt like preparation. I remembered Grandpa gripping my wrist last week, his eyes bright despite the tremor in his hands. "Trust what's quiet," he had whispered. "Noise is for people hiding something." The car doors shut outside, jolting me back. Engines started somewhere nearby, then faded. Silence followed, heavy and final. A moment later, the trunk opened. Caleb stood there, face pale but steady. "You heard everything." It wasn't a question. I nodded, climbing out slowly. My legs refused to cooperate, and for a second I grabbed the edge of the car to stay upright. The world tilted, not from fear, but from clarity arriving all at once. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I couldn't warn you sooner." I didn't answer. Words felt too small for what had just shifted. The ride back felt longer, even though traffic had eased as evening settled in. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Rain streaked across the windshield like blurred lines I couldn't follow. I stared at my smartwatch, replaying the audio file I had started recording the moment Caleb told me to hide. Their voices crackled through the tiny speaker, cold, clinical, undeniable. By the time we reached my condo, night had fully arrived. I thanked Caleb softly and stepped out, the air colder now, sharper against my skin. Inside, I dropped my bag by the door and stood still for a long moment. No tears, just a quiet hum inside my chest that felt like a machine switching on. I replayed the recording again, forcing myself to listen without flinching. Then I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out Grandpa's old notebook. The leather cover was worn smooth, corners softened from years of use. Inside were sketches, grocery lists, fragments of thoughts written in his looping handwriting. One page stopped me. "Elowen's wings don't belong in cages." I exhaled slowly, feeling something settle into place. This wasn't just about property. It was about voice, about presence, about being rewritten without consent. My calendar blinked on my laptop screen. Therapy appointment tomorrow. I hovered over it for a second, then deleted it. Not because I didn't need support, but because I needed clarity first. Instead, I opened a new tab and typed, "Request legal consultation. Elder fraud, guardianship, real estate transfer." My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen edges. Tired, yes, but steady. "They think I'll stay quiet," I murmured to the empty room. And I would, just not in the way they expected. Because if silence is the weapon they used against me, I'll master it better than they ever did. I started with the documents no one else thought I'd know how to read. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what I would do next. I sat at my small dining table, laptop open, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. Outside, the night had settled over the neighborhood, rain tapping gently against the window, like a steady metronome guiding my thoughts. I logged into the county recorder's office website, navigating through menus that most people found tedious or confusing. Years ago, Grandpa had shown me how to read property filings, for fun, as he called it. He'd laughed when I memorized the layout faster than he expected. "Details matter," he used to say. "Paper is where truth hides." I searched by parcel number first, then by owner name, then by document history. The new transfer paperwork appeared immediately. I leaned closer to the screen. My name wasn't there, not even as a witness. The ownership transfer form had been modified 2 weeks earlier. I checked the timestamp twice, then a third time, convinced I had misread it. 2 weeks. The same day my brother had taken Grandpa to see the new doctor. A heavy feeling settled into my chest, not panic, more like a slow understanding finally taking shape. "They moved everything while I was making soup in his kitchen," I whispered to the empty room. I clicked deeper into the document history, digital signatures, filing codes, legal language designed to sound neutral but carry enormous consequences. Someone had rewritten the narrative without ever telling me the story had changed. The memory came back suddenly. A dinner from 2 years ago. I'd arrived home late from work, tired but content, expecting the house to be quiet. Instead, there were extra dishes drying by the sink, plates I hadn't used, wine glasses still damp. I remember standing there, puzzled. "Oh," my brother had said casually when I asked. "We just had a quick estate planning meeting. Nothing big." "You didn't call me?" He smiled in that way he used when he thought he was being kind. "Don't worry, Elle. You wouldn't understand half the stuff anyway. It's complicated." I'd laughed then, brushing it off, telling myself it didn't matter. But Grandpa had avoided my eyes that night. I noticed it now, years later, the weight behind that silence. That was the first time I realized I had been removed from the conversation long before I noticed I was missing. Back in the present, I closed the browser slowly. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened screen, steady, focused. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. This was strategy. The next morning arrived quietly. I barely slept, but exhaustion didn't slow me. After dressing, I stepped outside, the air cool and sharp, and walked to a small coffee shop a few blocks away. It was early enough that only a few regulars sat inside, wrapped in their routines. Caleb was already there. He stood when he saw me, hands shoved awkwardly into his jacket pockets. "You look like someone who didn't get much rest." "I didn't," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He nodded, as if he expected that answer. "I thought about what you said," he began. "About your brother. I've seen things before. Families trying to push someone aside. It gets ugly." He slid a business card across the table. No dramatic gesture, just quiet certainty. "Call her." She helped my cousin when they tried to put her mom into a nursing facility without cause. "She knows the system." I hesitated, turning the card between my fingers. "You don't even know me." He shrugged lightly. "You stayed in the trunk when I asked. That tells me you trust your instincts. That's enough." I let out a small breath, surprised by how grounding his calm presence felt. After we finished our coffee, I walked home slowly, letting the cold air clear my thoughts. Inside, I pulled out the old leather folder Grandpa had given me for my 30th birthday. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside were photographs, one of us building a birdhouse in his backyard, sawdust clinging to his sleeves, blueprints for a house he once dreamed of designing but never did, and a small sticky note. "Never forget your hands were made to create, not to fold." I sat back, the weight of those words settling into me. For a moment, emotion rose unexpectedly, and tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. Not from weakness, but from recognition. He had always believed in me, even when others quietly erased me from the table. I wiped my face and opened a new folder on my computer. Family file, do not delete. The words looked stark against the screen. Later that afternoon, I met the attorney whose name was printed on Caleb's card. Her office was modest but orderly, shelves lined with thick legal binders that felt reassuring rather than intimidating. She listened without interruption as I explained everything. Grandpa, the apartment, the altered paperwork, the overheard conversation. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "Your brother has already filed a petition for conservatorship," she said. "The hearing is scheduled in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Time suddenly felt tangible, measurable. "How long exactly?" I asked. She checked her calendar. 13 days. I nodded slowly, feeling something sharpen inside me. "Then we have 13 days, I said. As I stepped back onto the sidewalk afterward, the city felt different, not hostile, not safe, just real. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, and I planned to use every one of them, starting with the lie they forgot to cover. The voicemail was only 6 seconds long, but it shattered everything they'd claimed in court. I didn't find it right away. It took another hour of searching through my cloud backups, old folders layered with years of forgotten recordings, until I noticed one labeled simply AutoSync, archived. I almost ignored it, assuming it was junk data, but something made me pause. When I pressed play, his voice filled the quiet room. "Elle, sweetheart, bring the papers with you. I want to sign them before your brother gets back." That was it. 6 seconds. But those 6 seconds carried more weight than every legal document filed against him. I checked the timestamp. 2 hours before my brother had taken Grandpa to his new doctor. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just proof that Grandpa had been lucid. It showed intent, planning, awareness. He knew time mattered. He knew someone might interfere. I replayed the message twice more, memorizing every nuance, the steady cadence, the clarity in his tone. There was no confusion, no hesitation, nothing resembling the decline described in the conservatorship filing. I forwarded the file to my attorney with a single word in the subject line: anchor. Within minutes, she replied, asking me to come in as soon as possible. The morning passed quickly after that. I dressed without much thought, grabbed my keys, and drove across town, rain streaking across the windshield, while my mind replayed the message again and again. At her office, she listened to the voicemail once, then a second time, eyes narrowing slightly. "This changes the narrative," she said quietly. "They're presenting him as incapable of making informed decisions. This shows the opposite." "But will it be enough?" I asked. "It gives us leverage, and more importantly, it introduces doubt." She turned her computer toward me, pulling up the court petition my brother had filed. I watched as she scrolled through pages of legal language designed to sound clinical and objective. Then she stopped. "This psychiatric evaluation," she said. "Something feels off." She dialed the clinic listed on the document. The number rang once, twice, then disconnected. She tried again. Same result. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, searching professional license databases. "No record," she murmured. "The license number doesn't exist." The air in the room shifted. "You're saying it's fake?" I asked. "I'm saying whoever submitted this expected no one to look too closely." A strange calm settled over me. The anger was there, but it had sharpened into focus rather than chaos. "They built their case on paper," I said slowly. "So we take it apart on paper." She nodded. "Exactly." That afternoon, instead of going straight home, I drove past Grandpa's house. I didn't stop at the curb. I parked across the street, engine idling softly while rain tapped against the roof. My brother's car sat in the driveway. The curtains were drawn tight. After a few minutes, the front door opened and a woman I didn't recognize stepped out, wearing scrubs. A home nurse, apparently. She helped Grandpa onto the porch carefully, guiding his steps with practiced patience. My chest tightened. He looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a blanket, but when he lifted his head, his eyes found mine immediately. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that connection. He smiled and raised 2 fingers. Not a wave, not quite a peace sign, more like a pause. Hold, wait. I stayed where I was. I didn't knock, not yet. This wasn't the moment for confrontation, it was the moment for observation. "They're building a story," I whispered to myself, "and I'm learning how it's told." When I returned home, the sky had already begun to darken. I dropped my keys on the counter and picked up the wooden keyring Grandpa had carved for me years ago. The letters L.E. felt warm against my palm. "What if I lose?" I asked the empty room softly. The question hung there longer than I expected. I opened my phone and recorded a private video journal, something I had started years ago during difficult times but rarely revisited. "If they erase me," I said quietly into the camera, "I hope someone remembers I was never the problem. I was the proof." I didn't save it publicly, just archived it. Later that night, as I reviewed documents again, an email notification appeared. No subject line, no message, only an attachment. My pulse quickened as I opened it. A scanned PDF filled the screen, sections blacked out, names hidden, but one line remained untouched. Subject identified as mental decline risk only after consultation with direct family member, Mr. L. Fairborn, my brother. He hadn't just agreed with the diagnosis, he had initiated it. I leaned back slowly, understanding settling into place like the final piece of a puzzle. They never needed real evidence. They only needed repetition. Say it often enough, with enough confidence, and people would accept it as truth. And that's when I realized they never intended to prove Grandpa unfit. They just needed to say it loud enough that no one would question it. I wasn't going to knock on their door. I was going to knock on the courtrooms. By mid-afternoon, I sat across from my lawyer in a beige-walled conference room filled with legal pads, folders, and tension you could smell. We filed the formal objection to my brother's petition, alongside a motion to investigate the document inconsistencies. The voicemail, the redacted PDF, the mismatched signature dates, they were all part of the file now. It was official. My brother was being served. He'll deny everything, my lawyer warned, adjusting her glasses. But this changes the tone. It moves the court date up. Judge Forrester doesn't play games. I didn't flinch. Good. We left the courthouse just as the sun began to fall behind the buildings, casting long shadows on the marble steps. The kind of shadows that make you question who's walking beside you. I headed home, but I couldn't shake the feeling something bigger was still out there, hiding. When I stepped into my apartment, I tossed my bag onto the armchair and sat on the edge of the couch, letting the silence settle like fog around me. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling, and refreshed the online case record. A new document had been uploaded. I clicked. It was the trust fund, not the apartment, not just the apartment. The entire financial trust my grandfather had built over his lifetime, the funds set aside for his care, his legacy, the charitable projects he'd once dreamed of, was now under threat. My brother had filed not only for conservatorship, but for full access to the estate. If approved, he could lock down everything, bank accounts, investments, property, all under the excuse of streamlining care. I scrolled to the bottom of the form, filed by L. Fairborn, immediate family member. Just like that, I saw it all clearly. He wasn't just trying to erase me, he was trying to own the silence that followed. That night, I curled up on the couch with my grandfather's old birdhouse in my lap. It had once sat proudly on his porch, a project we built together over a spring weekend when I was 12. Paint peeled now, but the structure held strong, just like him, just like I needed to. I played an old video on my phone, me and Grandpa, laughing, arguing over how many screws the roof needed, my voice high, his gentle. The camera tilted briefly, showing the workbench in the background, a row of drawers, and one slightly open. I paused the video. Was it always like that? I grabbed my keys and drove back to his workshop. The air inside was musty, filled with sawdust and a quiet sadness. I walked straight to the workbench, opened the drawer. Nothing. But when I looked under the drawer itself, tucked beneath with yellowing tape, was a folded sheet of paper. My hands shook as I pulled it free. It was a notarized letter, dated 9 months ago, in his handwriting. To whom it may concern, I, Percival Elias Fairborn, am of sound mind and heart. I wish to gift the Green Ridge apartment to my granddaughter, Elowen. She earned it with dignity. His signature, a stamp, a witness. He had planned for this. I held the letter to my chest and cried, not from weakness, but from the quiet recognition that love, real love, leaves a trail, even when those closest to you try to sweep it away. I made copies, scanned it, uploaded it. By the time I got back home, the sky had turned steel gray. Rain tapped against my window. I was halfway through emailing the letter to my lawyer when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Miss Fairborn? Yes. This is Veronica from Greenridge Assisted Living. I'm calling to confirm your grandfather's arrival. He was just admitted. I stood up. He wasn't supposed to be moved until next week. That's what we had on file, but your brother said there was an emergency and that you were traveling out of state. He signed the forms. I couldn't speak. He's resting now, but we wanted to let you know he's here. He seemed confused when he arrived. Confused or taken. I thanked her, barely remembering what I said, and hung up. He wasn't waiting for the court's decision. He was writing the final chapter himself. I arrived at Greenridge before sunrise, with a folder full of evidence and a promise I didn't know how to keep. The building looked peaceful from the outside. Quiet. Pale lights still flickered on inside, barely brushing the fog that rolled low over the asphalt. My hands clutched the folder against my chest, as if holding it tighter would somehow make the truth inside harder to ignore. At the front desk, a woman in pastel scrubs glanced up from her computer, startled. She stood with the kind of forced calm I'd seen in people who knew something they weren't supposed to say out loud. Hi, I said. I'm here to see Percival Fairborn. I believe he was transferred here yesterday. Her smile was hesitant. And you are? Elowen Fairborn, his granddaughter. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she clicked twice, then glanced at a screen I couldn't see. I watched her swallow, and then, carefully, she said, I'm sorry, Ms. Fairborn. Mr. Fairborn is currently under medical observation. He's not accepting visitors at this time. I leaned in. That's my grandfather. I'm his legal family. I understand, she replied, voice softer now. But we've received instructions. He's not to have contact with anyone outside of authorized care. Authorized by who? She didn't answer, just looked down. A second later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my attorney. I just got an alert from the court clerk, she said. Your brother filed an emergency protection order last night. Claims you've been emotionally distressing Mr. Fairborn and interfering with his care. The judge hasn't seen your counter-motion yet, but for now, the order stands. I stood there in the middle of the lobby, motionless. Not even angry yet, just frozen, like hearing someone had changed the locks to a house you built with your bare hands. So, that was it. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being legally erased. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded once to the woman at the desk, turned, and walked back out into the cold morning. Back at my apartment, the silence sat heavy. The sun had risen, but did little to warm the room. I made coffee out of habit, let it sit untouched on the counter. The walls echoed a little too easily without noise, so I opened the old cedar box tucked beneath the hallway bench. Inside was the voice recorder Grandpa had given me when I was 10. It still smelled faintly like his garage, sawdust and pipe tobacco. I clicked through the files until I saw one marked Legacy Number 7. It began with his voice, steady and clear. Now, make sure the left wing is wide open. Birds need room to leave, Elle. Never trap them in. The sound of wood being sanded hummed faintly underneath. I closed my eyes and let the sound of his voice fill the room. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until I let it go. Around noon, my lawyer called again. You may want to sit down for this, she said. Someone sent us a flash drive anonymously. It's surveillance footage from Greenridge, security camera in the hallway. She paused. I could hear her clicking through something. It's from this morning, time-stamped. Elowen, he wasn't confused. I leaned forward, every muscle in my body tense. He's standing with a nurse in the hallway, she continued. He looks right at the camera and says, "Did my Elowen come yet? She's always early, never misses a promise." Then he waits, looks down the hall, like he expected you. I covered my mouth with my hand, a sob catching in my throat. But I didn't let it out. That meant everything. It wasn't just that he remembered me. It meant he was still in there, still himself, still waiting. I forwarded the footage to our legal response file with one word in the subject line, proof. 2 hours later, a manila envelope was slipped through the slot in my front door. No return address. Inside was a folded note and a printed court document, one I hadn't seen before. The note read, "Ask about the second medical file. They submitted 2 reports, but only one made it to public record." The court document was a partial medical report, heavily redacted, but I saw enough to know this wasn't the one they'd used in court. This one said nothing about cognitive decline. In fact, it mentioned alert, coherent verbal interactions. It was signed off by a doctor I'd never heard of, but the initials didn't match the physician on the official court record. My brother hadn't just submitted a false report. He'd buried the real one. I stared at the note, at the printout, at the recording device still playing softly in the background, Grandpa's voice echoing through the room. "Elle, don't let people talk over your truth. Speak when it matters, be quiet when it counts, but never vanish." I didn't intend to. If I couldn't walk through the front door, I'd come in through the cracks he forgot to seal. I didn't want to fight this way, but I wasn't the one who turned love into litigation. The words stayed in my head as I sat across from my legal team, hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had long since gone cold. The office felt too bright for the kind of conversations we were having, like truth wasn't supposed to be discussed under fluorescent lights. "We move fast," my attorney said, sliding documents toward me. "Emergency subpoena for the second psychiatric report. And we request a full audit of every file your brother submitted." I nodded. The anger inside me wasn't loud anymore. It had changed shape, become quieter, sharper, less like fire, more like pressure. We filed before noon. There was something deeply surreal about watching a clerk stamp paperwork that might determine whether my grandfather was allowed to keep his dignity. The sound echoed in the room like a gavel. As we stepped into the hallway afterward, my attorney said softly, "If that second report exists, we'll find it." "If it doesn't?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Then we make them explain why." That afternoon, I sat in a medical records department that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old carpet. A man behind the desk reviewed my authorization forms twice, then once more as if hoping they would disappear. "You understand," he said carefully. "This is unusual." "So is forging someone's decline," I replied. He hesitated. Then he reached into a cabinet and pulled out a thin file. The moment he placed it in front of me, my pulse slowed. Not because I was calm, but because something inside me already knew. I opened it. The doctor's handwriting was neat, deliberate. Patient shows clear memory retention, logic processing, and emotional reasoning. No sign of incompetence. I read it again, and again. Stamped, verified. Dated 5 days before the fraudulent report. My brother hadn't just twisted facts. He had buried the truth. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The room felt too small for what I was holding. "He's fine," I whispered, mostly to myself. The records officer shifted uncomfortably. "According to that evaluation, yes." Outside, the air felt colder than when I had arrived. I leaned against the building, closing my eyes briefly. I thought about every conversation where my brother had said, "You're overreacting, Elle." Grandpa's confused. Every gentle correction, every dismissive smile. Gaslighting doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds reasonable enough to make you doubt your own memory. Back home, I spread the estate documents across my dining table like puzzle pieces. This time, I didn't read them as a granddaughter searching for reassurance. I read them like someone preparing for battle, line by line, clause by clause. And that's when I saw it. A small footnote buried near the end of a power of attorney addendum. Co-trustee privileges assigned to Elowen Fairborn in the event of contested guardianship. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "He gave me a sword I didn't even know I was carrying," I murmured. The clause was valid, still enforceable, and it changed everything. My brother hadn't just ignored me emotionally. He had deliberately bypassed a legal safeguard my grandfather had created, which meant one thing: Grandpa had anticipated resistance. He had planned for me to stand here. The realization settled over me like a quiet blessing. As evening approached, I left the apartment and drove without thinking too much about where I was going until I found myself standing at the rooftop garden of the building Grandpa and I had helped design years ago. The city stretched out below, lights flickering on one by one. I slipped off my shoes and walked slowly along the stone path, feeling the texture under my feet. "You lead best when you don't need to be loud," he had told me once while sketching plans. Back then, I thought he was talking about architecture. Now I understood he had been talking about people. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I was chasing approval or trying to prove I belonged. I was reclaiming something that had always been mine. My phone rang. The driver's name flashed on the screen. "Elowen," he said without greeting, voice tight. "Your brother filed paperwork to transfer him out of state, private facility, tomorrow morning." The air left my lungs. "If he leaves Washington," I said slowly, "jurisdiction changes." "Yeah," he replied quietly. "Everything delays." The timing wasn't an accident, it was strategy. "He's running out the clock," I said. Silence hung between us. "What do we do?" he asked. I watched the sky turn deeper shades of blue as dusk settled. "Then we stop the transfer." After hanging up, I stood there for a long time, the city noise rising faintly below. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about protecting someone who had trusted me long before I understood what that trust meant. We had 12 hours, and I intended to use every one of them. The voicemail. Grandpa left wasn't the only one. There was one more, scheduled to send at midnight. At 12:01 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown sender. One file, audio. I hesitated, heart pounding, thumb hovering, then tapped play. "If you're hearing this, they've tried to silence me, but they can't silence the law, or you, Elowen." He sounded tired but steady. "I chose you because you remembered who I was, even when they started acting like I'd already gone." I closed my eyes, letting his words echo inside the apartment. That voice, unfiltered, unscripted, wasn't confused, wasn't fading. It was lucid, brave, mine. By morning, I was standing outside the King County Courthouse, hair still damp, coffee untouched in the car. My hands held more than folders. Inside them were pieces of truth my brother had tried to bury. By 9 a.m., the courtroom was packed, not with strangers, but with neighbors, friends of Grandpa's, even a few former students from the community college where he once taught woodworking. Word had spread. My brother's attorney tried to speak first, of course. "We'd like to begin with clarifying the motivations behind." My attorney stood. "Your Honor, we request to begin with audio evidence directly related to the mental state of the respondent in this case." The judge, a wiry man with deep frown lines and a reputation for not liking games, nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom quieted. I reached for my phone, hit play. "If you're hearing this..." Every word dropped like a hammer. Gasps rippled. Some people leaned forward, Others sat back, stunned. When it ended, the judge looked at me. "Are you submitting this as part of a larger claim of fraud?" My voice was even. "Yes, Your Honor." We submitted the real psychiatric report, the time-stamped footage, the co-trustee clause, every silent thread woven together. My brother sat frozen beside his lawyer. When the clause was read aloud, he slammed his folder shut. The judge's ruling came quickly. This court finds the emergency conservatorship filing to be deceptive and unsupported. All assets, movements, and legal actions are to be frozen immediately. Legal control is granted jointly to Ms. Elowen Fairborn under the co-trustee clause, effective now. It was over. No, not over. It was changed. My brother didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just stood, straightened his tie, and walked out with the stiffness of a man who just realized the game was played without him ever reading the rules. I sat there, not triumphant, just breathing again. That evening, I returned to the rooftop garden. The sky was painted in slow pastels: peach, lilac, soft gray. I brought the birdhouse. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old paint. Grandpa and I had built it during one of the last summers I spent with him before college, back when legacy wasn't a word I thought about. I placed it on the highest ledge, nestled between lavender bushes he once helped plant. Opening its small drawer, I tucked the notarized letter back inside. I sealed it, not to hide, but to keep. I wasn't preserving evidence anymore. I was preserving intention. "You don't fight to prove someone was worthy," I whispered to the wind. "You fight to make sure they're remembered that way." The air was cool now, crisp. As I turned to leave, footsteps clicked across the stone. I looked up. It was the driver. "You know this isn't over, right?" he asked. I nodded. "It's not about winning court. It's about fixing the story." He handed me a manila folder, plain, no writing on it. "You'll want to see what your brother filed 5 years ago, before Grandpa ever got sick." My fingers trembled as I took it. "How far back does this betrayal go?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because maybe this story didn't start in the car to the notary. Maybe it started long before I ever opened the trunk. The first lie wasn't the diagnosis. It was the family dinner we all pretended was love. After everything that had come to light, I still wasn't prepared for what I saw inside the folder. The paper was yellowed slightly, but the ink was bold. It was dated 5 years ago, well before Grandpa's first fall, before the sudden change in his doctor, before the signatures started looking strange. My brother's name was typed at the bottom, not just as a beneficiary, but as the architect. It was a proposal, a draft plan for streamlining family assets into a centralized trust, citing anticipated health decline due to generational aging. There were outlines for transferring titles, managing Grandpa's accounts proactively, and quietly phasing out anyone not deemed a primary financial stakeholder. My name? Nowhere. I sat on the floor, that page spread out on my grandfather's old workbench. There were still wood shavings in the corners from the last time we built something together. I brought it to my lawyer. She skimmed, eyes tightening. This is premeditated. We could press charges for fraud, for conspiracy, maybe even elder abuse. I nodded, slowly. But the heat that had risen in my chest didn't burn the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like fire. It felt like frost. I stared at the document, at my brother's signature. I could take it all down now. I could drag it through the court, light it up in public, let the world know exactly how low he'd gone. But what would I be left with? Some ashes, a headline, a broken family name carved into 100 different case files. Did I want justice, or did I want peace? The next morning, I mailed a certified copy of the document anonymously to the State Board of Ethics and a nonprofit that monitored financial elder abuse. No press conference, No post, no vengeance. Just the truth. Delivered, not dramatized. A week later, I walked back into the same courtroom where everything had unraveled. Only this time, I wasn't fighting. The judge's voice was calm. Ms. Fairborn, by order of the court and in light of the validated co-trustee clause and confirmed records, you are now the sole trustee and custodian of Mr. Percival Fairborn's estate. My brother didn't show. His lawyer submitted a statement. Bankruptcy pending, all business accounts closed. I didn't smile, didn't cry. I just exhaled. That afternoon, I drove to the shed one last time. The same place where Grandpa used to keep his jars of screws, sketches of benches he never had time to build, and boxes of letters he never mailed. I opened the birdhouse drawer and tucked a photo inside. A simple one of us, arms around each other, holding up a crooked little birdhouse, laughing with paint still on our cheeks. I didn't frame it, didn't leave a message. Just slid it inside, closed the drawer, and whispered, "We built something, didn't we?" It was a week before I let myself slow down. One Thursday morning, I walked into a small cafe along the waterfront, an old place with rusted iron chairs and foggy windows. Grandpa used to take me there after library runs, said the ocean always made the truth taste better. I sat at a table near the window, cupped my hands around a warm mug of tea, and watched the gulls drift over the bay. A voice broke through the hum of clinking dishes. "Ms. Fairborn?" I looked up. A young woman, early 20s maybe, stood nervously, a folder clutched tight to her chest. "You don't know me," she said, "but I'm fighting something, like what you went through." Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, familiar. I pulled out the chair across from me. "You don't have to win today," I said gently, "but you have to remember your name. Start there." She sat, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something in my chest loosen. Not victory, not closure, recognition, because sometimes the people who try to erase you only prove you were never forgettable in the first place.